Johnny Carson asked a question. Clint Eastwood heard it, turned his head, and chose not to answer. Johnny's smile faded in seconds and nobody knew what to do. It was March 1978. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Another weeknight. Another lineup of guests. Another audience expecting laughs and easy conversation and the comfortable rhythm that Johnny had perfected over 16 years of hosting. Clint Eastwood was the guest. Hollywood's biggest star at that moment. Stoic, masculine, the man of few words who'd built an empire on silence and squinting. He'd been on the show before. Always brief. Always guarded. But professional. Respectful. He understood the game. Tonight felt different from the start. Clint walked out to applause, shook Johnny's hand, settled into the guest chair with that economy of movement he was famous for. Arms relaxed. Face neutral. The cameras loved him. He looked exactly like what America expected Clint Eastwood to look like. Johnny started with the usual questions. New film. Directing. The transition from actor to filmmaker. Clint answered in short sentences. Not rude, just efficient. Yes. No. Maybe. The audience laughed at Johnny's jokes. Everything seemed normal. And then, 7 minutes into the interview, Johnny asked the question. Clint, I've been curious about something for years. You've played a lot of tough guys, cowboys, cops, the man with no name. But I heard a story about you, something that happened before you were famous. In the army. Is it true you? No. Just that. One word. Flat. Final. Johnny's smile faltered. No, it's not true, or no, you don't want to talk about it. Clint looked at him. That famous stare. The one that had intimidated outlaws and criminals on screen. Except this wasn't a movie. This was live television. 300 people in the studio. Millions watching at home. I don't talk about that, Clint said, his voice even, controlled. Ever. The studio went silent. Not the dramatic silence of a planned moment. The uncomfortable silence of something going wrong. Carson stopped mid-interview. The entire studio froze. Johnny's hand, which had been gesturing casually, lowered to his desk. His smile, the professional smile that could carry through any awkward moment, completely disappeared. He looked at Clint. Then at his blue cue cards. Then back at Clint. Ed McMahon, sitting at the desk beside Johnny, shifted uncomfortably. His usual hearty laughter was nowhere to be found. He was watching his friend navigate uncharted waters. In the control room, director Bobby Quinn leaned forward toward the monitors. What just happened? He muttered into his headset. Did we lose something? Why did the energy die? Producer Fred de Cordova stood behind him, arms crossed. No technical issue, he said quietly. Eastwood just shut down. Well, tell Johnny to move on. Change topics. Go to commercial if you have to. But Johnny didn't move on. He sat there, studying Clint's face with an intensity that 16 years of interviewing had taught him to recognize. This wasn't just a celebrity protecting their privacy. This was something else. Something deeper. Clint, Johnny said slowly, his voice quieter now, stripped of the television host performance. I didn't mean to. You asked a question? Clint interrupted, still not moving, still wearing that impenetrable expression. I'm telling you I won't answer it. That should be enough. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the rows, then died immediately. This wasn't funny. This was tense. Real. Uncomfortable. Johnny nodded slowly. You're right. It should be. He paused, then did something that shocked everyone in the studio. He set down his blue cue cards and pushed them aside. No more prepared questions. No more script. Can I ask you why you won't talk about it? No, Clint said again. Same tone. Same finality. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what Johnny Carson had asked about. The story had circulated in Hollywood for years, whispered in green rooms and studio lots, never confirmed, never denied. It involved Clint Eastwood's time in the U.S. Army in the early 1950s, before he was an actor, before he was famous, when he was just a young man trying to figure out his life. According to the story, Clint had been stationed at Fort Ord in California. He was a swimming instructor, a good soldier, well liked by his unit. In 1951, he was on a Navy bomber that crashed into the Pacific Ocean during a routine flight. Clint and the pilot survived, swimming miles through freezing water to reach shore. That much was documented. Military records confirmed it. But the story that circulated wasn't about the crash or the survival. It was about what happened after. Supposedly, in the weeks following the crash, Clint had become withdrawn. Quiet. More than his usual reserved nature. His commanding officer had noticed. His fellow soldiers had noticed. Something about that experience, the cold water, the hours of swimming, the certainty of death that he'd somehow escaped, had changed him. The rumor was that Clint had suffered from what they didn't call PTSD back then. What the Army called nervous exhaustion, or simply ignored. That he'd spent nights unable to sleep, days unable to focus, his mind replaying those hours in the ocean over and over. And supposedly, a young Army psychiatrist had written a report. Nothing official. Nothing that went into Clint's permanent record. Just a note, an observation, a recommendation for follow-up that never happened because soldiers in the 1950s didn't get therapy. They got told to tough it out. That report had supposedly disappeared. Lost in military bureaucracy or deliberately destroyed. No one knew for sure. But the story persisted. Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's symbol of masculinity and strength, had once been vulnerable. Had once struggled. Had once been broken by something he couldn't control. Johnny had heard the story years ago from a director who'd served with Clint. He'd filed it away, the way television hosts file away hundreds of anecdotes about their guests. He'd thought it was interesting. Human. The kind of story that might make Clint more relatable to audiences who saw him as an untouchable icon. He hadn't realized it was the one story Clint Eastwood would never tell. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. In the studio, the silence stretched on. 10 seconds. 15. An eternity in television time. Doc Severinsen, standing with the band in the background, held his trumpet but didn't play. He'd been about to hit the music cue for a commercial break, but something made him wait. Everyone sensed this moment mattered. Johnny leaned back in his chair, studying Clint. The actor's posture hadn't changed. Arms still relaxed. Face still neutral. But Johnny had interviewed thousands of people. He could read the micro-expressions, the tiny shifts that revealed what people were really feeling. Clint Eastwood was holding something in. Tight. The way you hold in something that might destroy you if you let it out. You know what? Johnny said finally, his voice so quiet the boom microphones had to strain to catch it. I respect that. You don't know me, or anyone watching, your story. Some things are private. Some things should stay private. Clint's eyes shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough to show he'd heard. That he was surprised. But, Johnny continued, and reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out a fountain pen. An old one, expensive looking, the kind of pen that had weight and history. I want to tell you something. And I want everyone watching to hear this too. The cameras zoomed in slightly. The audience leaned forward. This pen, Johnny said, holding it up, belonged to my father, Homer Carson. He gave it to me when I left home to join the Navy in 1943. I was 18 years old. Scared out of my mind. Trying to act tough because that's what you did back then. You didn't talk about fear. You didn't admit weakness. He set the pen on his desk, right in the center where everyone could see it. My ship got torpedoed in the Pacific. We didn't sink, but we came close. 37 hours we waited for rescue, taking on water, not knowing if we'd make it. And I was terrified. Completely, utterly terrified. I thought I was going to die at 18 without ever having lived. Ed McMahon was staring at Johnny. In 17 years of working together, Johnny had never mentioned this. Never. When we finally got rescued, Johnny continued, when they pulled us onto another ship and we were safe, I went to the head and I threw up for 20 minutes. Then I sat on the floor and cried like a child. One of the other sailors saw me. Guy named Patterson. He sat down next to me and he said, "You know what the bravest thing you can do right now is? Stop pretending you're not scared." Johnny picked up the pen again, turning it in his hands. I wrote my father a letter with this pen. Told him what happened. Told him I'd been scared. Told him I'd cried. You know what he wrote back? He said, "Good. Fear means you understand what you're risking. And crying means you're still human. Don't ever lose either one." He looked directly at Clint. "I don't know what you went through, Clint. I don't need to know. But I know enough about war, about survival, about the things we carry, to understand why some stories stay locked away. And I want you to know, I want everyone to know, that there's no shame in that. Whatever you're protecting, whatever you're holding on to, you have every right to keep it yours." Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Clint Eastwood's face didn't change. Not dramatically. But something shifted. A softening around the eyes. A slight relaxation in his shoulders. He nodded once. A small movement, but everyone saw it. "Thank you," Clint said. 2 words. But they carried weight. Johnny set the pen down and smiled. Not his television smile, but something genuine and small. "Besides," he said, his tone lightening slightly, "if you told all your secrets, you'd ruin that mysterious cowboy image, and then where would we be?" The audience laughed. Not the big Tonight Show laugh. A relieved laugh. A grateful laugh. The tension broke like a wave. Clint's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "Can't have that," he said dryly. "No, sir," Johnny agreed. He glanced at his scattered cue cards, then pushed them further aside. "So let me ask you something completely different. That orangutan in your new movie. Who's smarter, him or your co-stars?" And just like that, the interview continued. Different now. Softer. More honest. Clint actually smiled a few times. Told stories about filming. Laughed at Johnny's jokes. The last 10 minutes of the segment felt more real than most interviews ever did. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. As the interview wrapped up and they went to commercial, Clint stood to leave. He shook Johnny's hand as always. But then he did something unexpected. He picked up the fountain pen from Johnny's desk. "May I?" he asked. Johnny nodded, surprised. Clint held the pen for a moment, feeling its weight. Then he handed it back. "Hold on to that," he said quietly, so only Johnny and the nearby microphones could hear. "Not everyone gets a father who understands." Johnny's throat tightened. He took the pen back, nodded. Clint walked off stage to applause. Johnny sat at his desk, the pen in his hand, his eyes glistening slightly. Ed McMahon reached over and squeezed his shoulder. During the commercial break, Johnny placed the pen back in his desk drawer. But from that night forward, he kept it in a different spot. Right at the front. Where he could see it every time he opened the drawer. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After that night, Johnny Carson changed how he interviewed people. He listened for the questions that shouldn't be asked. He watched for the moments when silence was the answer. He understood that sometimes respecting what people won't say matters more than getting them to talk. The pen stayed in his desk drawer until his final show in 1992. In his last week of hosting, Clint Eastwood returned as a guest. At the end of the interview, Johnny opened his drawer and showed him the pen. "Still there," Johnny said. Clint nodded. "Good." They never spoke about that night in 1978. They didn't need to. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Years later, young talk show hosts would ask Johnny for advice. He always told them the same thing. The best interview isn't about getting someone to reveal everything. It's about knowing when to stop asking. The fountain pen is now in the Smithsonian. The placard beneath it reads, Homer Carson's pen, a reminder that some stories belong to those who lived them.